Welcome back. I'm Elaine Reyes. Little Uruguay, wedged between the two regional powers of Brazil and Argentina, has always had to shout to be heard. But in its current president, José Mujica, the country has found a commanding voice with very frank views. He's a different kind of president. Unlike some world leaders who flaunt their wealth by taking lavish trips or living in grand palaces, Mujica lives in a modest home and drives a used car. President Mujica recently invited America's Now to his country retreat to share some of his thoughts with correspondent Daniel Schweimler.
There are few presidents like José Mujica. He assumed office in 2010, aged 74, after a life in politics, which included armed struggle in the 1960s with the Uruguayan rebel movement, the Tupamaros. He spent 14 years in jail. His wife, Lucia Topolansky, is a senator in the Uruguayan parliament. Their three-legged dog, Manuela, a symbol too of a life of struggle, all resting at the presidential retreat, La Anchorena, deep in the Uruguayan countryside, where they received America's Now. We covered a range of subjects, the theme of Latin American solidarity, one close to his heart.
Because we agree on these things, both from the left and the right and the center, the feeling of solidarity is growing among us, and the feeling of belonging and having a common heritage.
President Mujica spoke about the indignation felt across Latin America after the plane carrying the Bolivian president, Evo Morales, was earlier this month refused permission by several European countries to enter their airspace. They suspected, wrongly, that the American whistleblower Edward Snowden was on board.
I believe that the intelligence agencies made a mistake. They said that Snowden was on the plane. And that mistake caused the governments to make mistakes afterwards. There are certain universal guarantees that we need to keep to enable us to live together. But really, if it had been Putin's plane, they would have not done it. If it were a Chinese plane, they wouldn't have done it. That's for sure.
Despite greater Latin American solidarity, Uruguay is embroiled in regular disputes with its bigger, more powerful neighbours, Brazil, and more frequently Argentina, usually over trade. How does Uruguay cope?
Perhaps we're conceived as a buffer country. We must work as a bridge between two big countries like Brazil and Argentina, which have a lot of land. We cannot do without our neighbors. The only way we've managed to do without them is in football. In everything else, we are notoriously dependent on them, in our economy, for instance. However, Uruguayans are tremendously respected in the region, and they appreciate us proportionally more than our size would indicate. Today, Brazil is becoming a major player in Latin America. In just a few years, it'll be the fourth or fifth most important country in terms of international relations. It would be very clumsy if we became excessively nationalistic in the era of globalization. Nations exist and spaces exist, but we need to form more unity to give us more weight and presence in the world.
It is to China that Uruguay and its partners in the Mercosur trade bloc look increasingly these days.
Mercosur has to talk to China. It has to define its own terms because we can't ignore the demand and purchasing power that China has in this region. Why? Because this region, Uruguay, Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay, are exporting food essentially, and China has a big demand for food. We need to use China's strength in our favor, that not only concentrates on their need for our primary products, but China is so big, we need to negotiate. We have to recognize the reality. The competitive might of Chinese industrial power is so great that with market forces as they are, without talks, they could wipe out any industrial advances we had in the region, even without meaning to.
Uruguay, with a population of less than 4 million, enjoys a stable economy, is a fiscal haven for many in the rest of South America, a major exporter of beef, and a leading producer of cellulose, used in the making of paper. It's also been a pioneer in introducing liberal policies, the first in the region to give women the vote, the first to legalize abortion. President Mujica has also applied this same pragmatism to the proposed legalization in Uruguay of the sale of marijuana.
But it's not like we're saying marijuana is a good thing. It would be like saying cigarettes and cigars are good. They are drugs too. What we want is for the state to take the path of regulation of those drugs. Otherwise, we are giving the market to the crime world. We believe this is the way to follow to steal the market from the drug traffickers. This should all be accompanied by a campaign, a systematic daily campaign trying to change and educate people, especially so that young people can defend themselves against drugs.
After more than 3 years in office, President Mujica can point to some successes and a few frustrations. I asked him what had so far been his greatest achievement.
Whoever was poor and had to go to bed on an empty stomach and had to sleep in the cold or in a house that didn't keep out the rain understands poverty. Our biggest success in these years is that 700 to 800,000 people who are poor in a country of 3 million are better off and are at the bottom of what we can call an emerging middle class.
José Mujica has ensured that Uruguay's voice is being heard through the many Latin American regional organizations. He is also a keen student of his own country's history and the impact and responsibilities that that history brings to the present day. There are no frills with President José Mujica. He dresses casually, requires minimal security, gives 90% of his wage to charity and drives a second-hand car. A refreshing touch of old-fashioned charm in a Uruguay trying to move with the times.
Daniel Schweimler reporting from Uruguay. Thanks very much. In addition to being known as a major exporter of beef, Uruguay is also recognized as Latin America's leading exporter of computer software. In 2011, Uruguay exported a total of $265 million in software products and services to over 50 countries.